Hello everyone, and welcome to a retrospective episode of the Backlog Bunker. I know I just did one on Final Fantasy, but I forgot that I was gonna have another long break like right after this, so I need to come up with something to talk about, and luckily, at the time of recording this, I just finished Yakuza 6, which at the time of uploading has probably been long gone at this point. You've probably already seen the Backlog Bunker on me talking about it, but I figured I might as well talk about the entire series because I kind of dipped my toes into that during the Yakuza 6 thing, which I'm also realizing I did for the Final Fantasy 6 retrospective. But the point being, we're going to talk about the Yakuza games because I have a lot to say about all of them, and I didn't talk about them in the initial episodes because I hadn't beaten 6 yet. So we're going to talk about the Kiryu Saga today because I haven't played the RPGs yet, and those will get their own retrospective when that series is done, assuming I'm still doing this series. But the point is, we're just going to go through the Yakuza games today, starting in the order that I played them in, which was 0, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I'm typically an advocate for playing games in release order because that's the way the rest of everybody else played them. If you were playing them as they came out, then you played them in release order, obviously. The only exception to this rule is when developers make it clear that a series like a prequel or something is meant to be experienced before the other ones. So, for example, the Yakuza games. RGG Studio has at some point, I believe, said that 0 is meant to be a jumping on point, and since you can play 0 in the Kiwami games, and then get right into the remaster trilogy, and then play 6, then that's the intended way for you to play these games from this point going forward. Not to say you can't play them in release order. If anything, it might make more thematic sense to play 0 and have Majima be a protagonist if you played that after 5, but the point is, it's fine to play 0, the Kiwamis, and the games normally. But do not do that for Kingdom Hearts. If you play the Kingdom Hearts games in chronological order, you're stupid and I hate you. But starting with Yakuza 0, it's very much an interesting way for me to have played this game, because when I initially played it, that was like 2 years ago at this point. Because I had 2 games for the PS4 that I planned on playing, and those were the Kingdom Hearts 3 and Yakuza 0. Well, Kingdom Hearts 3 and 0.2, but the point is, I was going through the Kingdom Hearts series at the time, and I had basically just beaten Dream Drop Distance, and so I was on to finishing the 2.8 collection, and then playing 3, and then I also had 0 there as an option, or Yakuza 0 there as an option. And so then, my decision came to, well, which one do I play the most? Kingdom Hearts 3 or Yakuza 0? And to put it simply, I ended up playing far, far, far more Kingdom Hearts 3. I platinumed the game, in fact, and fought every single Remind boss except for Yozora, which left Yakuza 0 in an awkward position where I had played the first, 2 hours of the game, if even, and then I just didn't play any more of it that entire time I was playing. And so, eventually, a year had passed, and I got back around to playing Yakuza 0, and it was once again contending for my attention. But this time around, I had less to play other than Yakuza 0, so I actually got to put some significant amount of time into it. And at the time I was playing it, I was bored at some points, but for the most part I was enjoying myself. I was just running around, doing side stories when they came up, doing the main story as I went along, and I was enjoying myself. But the more I played, the more it started to wane on me, and I didn't realize why until I was basically at the end. And that's because I realized that Yakuza 0's sub-stories don't give you anything. I mentioned this briefly on the Backlog Bunker about Yakuza 6, but the sub-stories giving you tangible rewards in the Yakuza games is very, very important. And in Kiwami 1, they gave you just straight-up experience, and you leveled up with that. In Kiwami 2 and 6, it was a little bit more hair-pulling, but they still did give you experience, even if it ends up not being all that useful. But in 0, the way you level up is with money, and sub-stories do not give you money. They'll give you an item that's not very useful, but it's an item, and that's it. You go on your merry way. And for a long time, I didn't realize that I wasn't getting anything for these sub-stories because of 2 things. For 1, the sub-stories in 0 are very, very good. They are extremely entertaining. And for 2, because I never really gave any thought to the idea that I had wasted my time doing a sub-story, because the thought never occurred to me that they would put something in the game that would just not give me anything. So I did them, and I was just letting them happen because I assumed they were part of the game, and, technically they are, but again, you don't really get anything for them, and I didn't really give that any thought until I was basically at the end. And I'm very, very happy that thought did not occur to me until I was basically at the end, because if that thought had occurred to me in the middle of playing the game, I would have been very, very angry. And really, a large part of me even being able to get through Yakuza 0 was just me not realizing how long it was taking, because, again, at the end of it, in retrospect, I can realize that game I spent dozens of hours in that game, because that game is long. But in playing the game, it wasn't really all that bad. But again, the more I started to play it, the more the cracks started to show. particularly in the combat. Because as the game, progressed in difficulty, the more I started to notice things that I just hated. Like, for one, the game just has awful defense mechanics. I noticed this the most in fighting Mr. Shakedown, because blocking is useless against him, and dodging is also useless, because dodging doesn't have any iframes in Yakuza 0, and I don't believe in any other Yakuza game either. So even though I had reacted to Mr. Shakedown's swings perfectly, Kiryu's rush mode didn't move out the way quick enough, and so even though I dodged at the exact time that I should have, because I didn't have any iframes and didn't go far enough, I got hit and died. And then on top of that, unlike a lot of other Yakuza games, which, to be fair, fighting is pretty pointless in most Yakuza games, but in Zero it felt particularly pointless, because again, the way you upgrade in Zero is with money, and you don't get a lot of money from doing really anything in the game. You get money from either progressing the story, or from doing the main minigames. For Kiryu it's the real estate, for Majima it's the cabaret club. And both of those minigames suck, so if you're not doing them, you're not getting upgrades. But then those go on to make everything else in the game feel like they're just not worth anything. Why would I ever fight enemies if they don't give me anything? At least in Kiwami 2 and Yakuza 6, fighting enemies lowers your hunger gauge, which means you can go and grind food if you need to. But in Zero, you do not have this luxury. Fighting enemies is just a waste of time. And not very fun either, because of the series' long-standing tradition of enemies that just block the middle of your combos for fun. The way both Kiryu and Majima ended up for me was in their pink styles, which for Kiryu is Rush and for Majima is Breaker. Because for Kiryu, it was annoying and it was slow, but it was consistent because I could constantly get chip damage in by just jabbing, dodging, jabbing, dodging, jabbing, over and over and over again until eventually the boss died. And also because Rush had the best finishing blows, so they were easier to get. And for Majima, Breaker's absolutely busted, because once you use his second stage finishing blows, no enemy's able to hit you or even really stop you, because even if they're blocking, the moves have so many hitboxes that it'll just hit through their block anyway. But honestly, that's really all I have to say about Yakuza 0, because that's really it. The combat was bad, and it dragged down the entire game, and the sub-stories not giving you anything was also pretty bad, but for the most part it was the combat. And the story is pretty good. Probably the best Yakuza story that has existed so far, because 1's is fine, 2's is fine but less fine than 1's, 3's is not very good, 4's is good but not better than 0's, 5's, and 6's. So yeah, Zero has the best story. It's a shame it's so very long and dragged down by the gameplay that sucks, but yeah, best story. One of the things that really sells me on Zero having the best story are, well, I guess it's two things actually, is one, the conspiracy, which every Yakuza game has, but Zero does the best, and two, the build-up, because Zero spends a lot of time actually getting you invested in the characters that last you from the beginning to the end. Whether it be Nishiki, Dojima's lieutenants, Awano has the best fit in the entire franchise by the way, do not argue with me, Tachibana, Makoto, Sagawa. Yeah, that's Majima's guy. Sagawa's probably one of my favorite characters in the game, and I'm sad that he gets got at the end. But, again, great characters. Majima should have been the real protagonist. I understand having Kiryu there, and it made sense for the parts of the plot that he was involved in, but for the most part, near the end, it felt very much more like a Majima story than a Kiryu story, and it's kind of weird that they retcon Majima's personality, but at the end of the day, Zero has a good story, and I like it a lot. Which is not something that I can say as much about Kiwami 1. And this isn't to say Kiwami 1 has a bad story. As I mentioned earlier, it has a fine story. But a fine story with not fine gameplay just makes for an as good experience as Yakuza 0, just not as bad because it's easier to get EXP. It's not based on money, which is based on minigames. So I can actually play the game and have at least some improvement in the combat this time around. But on the whole, Kiwami 1 isn't that much better than 0. It only gets a 5 where 0 gets a 4 because the EXP system is better, sub-stories actually matter, and it's mercifully short. Though this is not to say that it always felt short, because as mentioned on the Yakuza 6 Backlog bunker, there are very many times throughout this game where it feels like it's wasting my time, particularly when you're getting the fucking dog food with Haruka. That's not fun. Why'd you make me do that? And yeah, the gameplay is much the same as Zero's. It even keeps the styles from Zero, even though they weren't in the original game, because, it's Kiwami 1. But the Dragon of Dojima style is very much appreciated, since it allowed me to steamroll the later parts of the game, and because doing Majima everywhere gave me a shit ton of EXP. And in terms of the story, I think it ends way better than it starts, and has a middle, because those early parts of the story are very, standard, like I said, fine, but it gets more exciting towards the end. Not good, mind you, but essentially when Yumi shows up, it becomes a much better story. And I find it funny that Kiwami 1 inserted a lot of Nishiki scenes to make his descent into being a villain way more apparent, but it still didn't make a lot of sense. Why did Nishiki start hating Kiryu for doing nothing wrong? Is he stupid? But that's really all I have on Kiwami 1. In terms of Kiwami 2, it's much more of a mixed bag, because as mentioned on the Yakuza 6 Backlog Bunker, I've had mixed thoughts about Kiwami 2 in retrospect, because having played the game, I thought it was fine when I first played it. I thought it was the best Yakuza game. It was solid 7. Still not a great game, but better than every Yakuza game I played at that point. But now having played 6, I'm wondering how many of those things were actually good about Kiwami 2, and how many of those things were just better than the other games, or at least different than the other games, which made me think that they were that much better. There are a few things that my memory is good enough about Kiwami 2 to be able to say are just better than 6, because, mind you, in the real world time, Kiwami 2 came after 6, so any refinements they wanted to make to the Dragon Engine Yakuza games, they would have made in Kiwami 2, which I believe that they did in some aspects. Like, for example, sub-stories. You can see potential sub-stories anywhere on the map, even if you haven't done them yet, which is frankly kind of astounding, since Yakuza games are very on and off about that leading up to Kiwami 2, because I don't know about the original 1 and 2, but Yakuza 3 shows you how to start them, Yakuza 3, 4, and maybe 5, I don't know, I didn't play that one, to completion. They will show you when they start them, but not how to continue them or where they ended up. Then 0 and Kiwami 1 threw that shit out completely and said, yeah, just guess, asshole. Good luck finding them. Then 6 only showed you them after you've already started them, but not when they initially start, so, again, good luck finding them, asshole. But Kiwami 2 allowed me to pursue them whenever I wanted, and to find them whenever I wanted, so I fucking loved it for that. That was awesome. The orb system and the XP system was still janky, but considering the fact that I could just go and do whatever sub-stories I wanted at any time, I didn't mind all that much. And the combat itself just wasn't as bad as other games. My memory might be flawed here, because it's been a little bit since I played Kiwami 2 at this point, and like I said, playing 6 has altered my memories a bit. But when playing Kiwami 2, as far as I remember, enemies were not constantly blocking your fucking combos, and Extreme Heat Mode worked way better in Kiwami 2, as far as I remember. The lack of heat moves was still definitely a problem, but it wasn't as much of a problem in Kiwami 2, because I think that around Chapter 5 or so, you do unlock the ability to get far more of them, but I hope that's not just me conflating my memories with Yakuza 6. And with the story, it's, again, fine, but less fine than Kiwami 1's. If only for the fact that the villain is worse in Kiwami 2. Like, I mentioned how Nichiki is stupid, because yes, he absolutely is, but at the same time, he is sort of right for some of his contentment, and 10 years in the joint did make Kiryu a fucking pussy, so it makes sense for him to be the way he is in some aspects. But with Ryuji Goda, I don't get any of his deal. Why is he such an asshole? Why does he care about really anything? And why does Kiryu care about him? When they're fighting each other at the end of the game, and they're like, I guess it really is our Yakuza Kiwami 2, I don't really care, because I don't even know if Kiryu cares. Like, these characters don't interact with each other at all. At least with Nichiki, we can get the lie to the audience that Kiryu and Nichiki care about each other. And I say lie because in actual Yakuza time, when Yakuza 1 came out, it was just the cutscenes without any of the added Nichiki stuff, and without Yakuza 0. So at the time, you can really only assume what their relationship is supposed to be, but at least you have that assumption. But for Ryuji Goda, like I said, him and Kiryu don't interact, like, ever, and even when they do interact, it's like, so you are the Dragon of Dojima, aren't you? And Kiryu's like, And then Ryuji Goda is like, well, I'm the dragon, so, like, there is no dragon of blank, I'm just, like, that guy. And then Kiryu goes, that's crazy, and they fight. And then Kiryu fucks his sister, which is funny, so rest in piss, you will not be missed, Ryuji Goda. Unfortunately, none of that shit carries over into Yakuza 3, because Sayama leaves instantly, and then Kiryu does all of his orphanage bullshit, which makes for an awful gameplay experience at the beginning of that game, holy shit! The fact that they lower your walking speed when you enter the orphanage drove me up a fucking wall. I couldn't deal with it. It was already wearing thin on me when I was playing through those parts of Yakuza 3, but when I got to the Blockuza 3 part of the game, I think with the first or second real boss, I just gave up. I was not playing Yakuza 3. It was slow, it was tedious, it did the thing that I talked about on the Yakuza 6 Backlog Bunker where I felt my time being wasted in real time. And on top of it all, the story just was not hooking me. It was wholesome, don't get me wrong. I like the orphanage stuff from a character perspective. It was all great stuff to watch, but it wasn't very fun stuff to watch, especially in context of having to play the fucking game in between them. But then, those are actually the best parts of the game, because I went on to, watch the rest of the cutscenes afterwards, and the story only gets worse, or at least more boring. So, to make a long story short, I skipped Yakuza 3 because I wasn't really interested in the story, and the gameplay was Blockuza 3. People were right. Then with Yakuza 4, I'm actually kind of surprised that I didn't drop it, because for the most part, Yakuza 4 is very similar to Yakuza 3. There's less Blockuza going on, but for the most part, the game does play very similarly. So what was actually the difference maker? And I think it was two things. For one, the story is way better in 4. They hook you with good ideas, they hook you with new ideas, and they hook you with good and new characters. of the characters to start the game with, I think the two options were between Akiyama and Tanimura, and they went with Akiyama, which I can't complain about, because Akiyama is a great character and a fantastic start to the game. Saejima I don't like quite as much, from a gameplay perspective too, because his big, slow, heavy bullshit is not fun to play, and his prison sections are really boring. But his story does pick up as it goes along. And then Tanimura was interesting because we get to play as a cop for once, which was different from a story perspective, and not that different from a gameplay one, though his whole thing being based on like dodges and parries and whatnot was a more engaging way to use defense in the Yakuza games, though it wasn't like effectively all that different, but it was different enough. And then Kiryu is Kiryu. And the game does the interconnecting plots thing pretty well, so I have really no complaints about the story, even up until the end. The only complaints I have come with the gameplay, and even then, it's not very many of them, because like I said, for the most part, it does play similarly to Yakuza 3, but there are a few key differences. For one, as I mentioned, there's no Blockuza going on, so that's nice, but what I noticed only after having beaten the game, or at least close to beating the game, was the reason that the character switching was actually more engaging than other games, because it's not something where it's like, oh, just playing a different character is more engaging because jingling keys or whatever. No, it's because the way the game is designed around all your characters starting from scratch. So the difficulty curve of the different characters is not going to be as steep as the other games, because when you get to the end of each character's thing, you're not supposed to be like some jacked out motherfucker who's been playing the game for 15 hours. You only have like 4 around for each character, and so you get upgrades way faster, and the actual enemies you fight are not as annoying. They still have their typical Yakuza quirks, because the combat in these combat-focused games has always been ass, but for the most part, you still get the upgrades and you get to face some pretty decently balanced enemies. The only problem with Yakuza 4 comes at the very, very end of the game, and those who have played the game probably know where I'm going with this, but it has to do with the final boss, because what happens at the end of the game is that you have to play against 4 different final bosses for 4 of the different characters. They are the Yakuza 4, and how fun these bosses are varies wildly. Akiyama's sucks because of Yakuza combat sucking, so that one's pretty straightforward. Saejima's sucks, but is fairly easy because once you get his fully upgraded charge attacks, you can just spam those and get some good damage in. Kiryu's is fine as long as you have Tiger Drop, because you can just spam that against Tiger over and over again, and what's he gonna do about it? Tiger Drop negates all damage. But the real problem comes with Tanimura's boss fight, because Tanimura's boss fight isn't really a boss fight, it's a mob fight. And if you'll remember, either from this episode of the Yakuza 6 Backlog Bunker, mob fights in Yakuza games are awful, because a back hit in Yakuza games is always a guaranteed hit, which means that if you're ever fighting a group of enemies, and some of them will inevitably end up behind you, they will just swing at you, and they will be able to hit you, because you can't really do anything about it. So, when you get to a mob fight as a boss fight against a lot of jacked up enemies, and a guy who's shooting you from across the goddamn stage that keeps running away from you, you end up with a situation like Tanimura's boss fight, which is awful with a capital A, and it almost made me quit the game. I was at the end of the game, and I almost quit, because Tanimura's boss fight is just bad. I eventually did overcome it, though not without pulling out a few hairs first, and I beat Yakuza 4, and I liked it more than I did 3, because I didn't really beat 3, and much like Kiwami 1, it was very mercifully short, but at the end of the day, it's still only about as good as 0, so Yakuza 4, not as bad to get through. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it either, and that's definitely not a good game. The only thing I can really praise about Yakuza 4 is that it gave us Akiyama, so I'm glad he got to stay, but Tanimura got shot in the back of the head behind an alley, so I just want to be seeing him again. And the Yakuza 4 disbanded forever, until they reformed a new group called the Yakuza 5, made up of 2 new people, Haruka and Shinada. But I didn't play Yakuza 5, especially not to get to the other characters, so I can't really speak on that. But I will speak on 2 things. For one, the parts of the game that I did play before I quit, and the parts of the game that I almost played that would have been right after I quit. In terms of the parts of the game that I did play, obviously I started the game as Kiryu and then played for the first like 4 or so hours, and then nothing specific happened that made me drop the game. I just dropped it at some point, because as I outlined on my backlog on the website, the reason I dropped it is because I was playing it and I realized, hey, this game's about as good as 4 and 0, but I'm not going to finish it, because it's only about as good as 4 and 0. And I would not have made it through either of those games if they did not have simple things pushing them through. With 0, it's that it had a good story and that I wasn't really paying attention, and with 4, it's because it was mercifully short and I was allowed to just beeline to the end of the game. But 5 does not have this luxury, because with 5, I am now acutely aware of all the problems with the series, and, on top of that, 5 is the longest Yakuza game by far. And actually, with my backlog open here in front of me, I can see that there actually was the exact moment that I dropped 5, and that was in a mob fight. Because why would it be anything else with this stupid fucking series? Of course it was in a mob fight. And so, in that mob fight, I died, got sent back like 20 minutes, and that's when I had that realization, oh, 5 isn't any different. I'm experiencing Yakuza 4 right now, I'm experiencing Yakuza 3 right now, I'm experiencing Yakuza Kiwami 1, and I'm experiencing Yakuza 0 right now. These games are all the same, and they're all equally as bad. So why am I playing 5? Why would I waste 30-something hours of my life playing 5 when it's just gonna be the same bullshit, but for longer? So I dropped 5. And looking at what comes after Kiryu section, this is like the most prolific dodging of a bullet that I've ever had in my entire career of playing video games, because Saejima section, after the prison parts, which are also pretty bad, mind you, involves a bunch of stupid bullshit like hunting in the woods for a bear or whatever. And as I was watching the game walkthrough on 2x speed, I realized, oh, if I'd gotten to this part of the game, I might have broken something. Probably not, because I don't get physically angry doing these things anymore, but I would have had to lie down. I would have either fallen asleep while playing the game, or have gotten so personally irritated by the wasting of my time that I would have just closed the game and had to lie down. Because otherwise I'd get a splitting headache from the constant ringing in my ears, and the bloodshot red rage shaking over my vision. Which unfortunately I was not completely spared from when I got to Yakuza 6, because I'm gonna try not to mention everything that I said on that backlog bunker, because you can go watch that one if you want my full thoughts on Yakuza 6. But to make a long story short, Yakuza 6 also did not respect my time by having me do stupid fucking baby rocking minigames, and the combat was worse than Kiwami 2, because I guess they hadn't refined the Dragon Engine as much quite yet. And the EXP system had really revealed how awful it was by giving me a bunch of orbs that I couldn't use, to the point where, by the end of the game, I had like 9999 in red orbs and actual pennies in green and purple, because the game just is not balanced around getting all types of EXP. So you're just going to have way too many of one type and none of the other types, and you can't upgrade anything because it's all dependent on what your lowest amount of EXP is. You can only upgrade insofar as you have all the types, and if you don't have all the types, it doesn't matter how much you have of one type, it'll be fucking useless. So the one thing that I'll talk about with Yakuza 6 that I did not mention on the backlog bunker dedicated to it is the fact that 6 is supposed to be the send-off of Kiryu. This is supposed to be the end of Kiryu's story, but it really doesn't feel that way. And I know that that's easy to say in retrospect, since I know that 7 and 8 exist and Gaiden and all that, but still, even playing Yakuza 6, it does not feel like a Kiryu's going away game until, like, basically the final cutscenes of the game, like after you finish the final boss. Before that point, the closest it gets to feeling like a, oh yeah, this is Kiryu's final game type of thing, is the fact that a lot of characters will mention, like, the Dragon of Dojima sure is old, isn't he? Which, like, yeah, that's true, he's like 50-something at this point, but like, can you tell? He still fights like he's 20. If anything, from a thematic standpoint, it almost feels like the game's trying to say that, no, Kiryu's not old, Kiryu's not down and out yet, he can still keep going. Then the game ends and he's like, alright, Kiryu's done. Which is made anticlimactic by future knowledge of Yakuza 7, 8, and Gaiden. But even in this game, it's like, oh, that's it? And then for, what, like, 4 years, that was it, because Like a Dragon didn't come out until, what, like, 2020, right? So I guess I'll experience that soon enough, but for now, this was the Kiryu saga of the Yakuza games. I'm probably never going to play Gaiden, because 6 has really soured my experience on the real-time combat of the Yakuza games. If I get it for free, in some capacity, then I'll probably try it, but no guarantees I'll actually beat it or even give most of the shit. Ishin certainly is a game that exists, but I probably won't ever play that one either. And as funny as Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii looks, probably not going to play that one either, because it's just going to be more of the same, but now you can jump. But for now, that's it from me. This will be one of 3 episodes that I pre-record to go up while I'm away. So, not 4, like I said, in the Yakuza 6 backlog bunker, because I got lazy and didn't record one of them. Well, got lazy is a strong word. I ran out of time, but I ran out of time because I got lazy. So, that's just the way it is. But, thanks for coming, and see you guys next time. So, leave for now.